Recording is on.
All right, today is November 29th, 2020, and we're continuing our discussion on the Desiderata Extinctionati. I think last week we finished off our discussion on the virus, the coronavirus, and then we started off on was talking about art a little bit, but we can continue that discussion. I know we had another person who was very interested, but he's not here yet. Where do you guys want to go for right now?
So yeah, I had I was intrigued by your guys' takes on the situation, because I kind of feel like that the situation they've now taken advantage of the situation. The governments seem to have, they've scared the shit out of the population. Rightly so. The first lockdown, we didn't know how bad it was. But it's interesting now in UK, because there's a lot of people in mainstream media who are digging into the facts and the science, who are saying, well, hang on a minute, they're just lying to us now. I mean, the evidence doesn't stack up. That the epidemic is still as bad as it was. I'm not saying that it's not a dangerous virus for some people, but it seems like it's a convergent. The phrase I liked was convergent opportunism, and the thing that's worrying me, definitely along the lines of the managed extinction nightmare, is how they've just driven a coach and horses through our constitution in the UK anyway. And as we know, governments don't like to, once they've put these powers in place, like after 9/11 and all of the terrorist laws that they put in place, they never roll back on those. So of course, it feels like, we're definitely moving towards more and more state control in terms of what you can do. I mean, in the UK, I know that the main thing that I cottoned onto was that they could have used the Civil Contingencies Act, but they didn't. They used a new coronavirus bill they brought in specifically, which they don't have to get. It's not scrutinized by Parliament, so they can just keep, rolling it, and they don't need any. And now, obviously, there's no opposition to any of it, because the Labour Party, basically, they want even more draconian measures. So it definitely feels like we're heading down a pretty dark path, which is kind of spooky how quickly these things can come about. I don't know, maybe there'll be a turn, maybe there'll be a massive public rebellion, but it seems like most people in that I meet are just like, oh yeah, like we need to double down even more. Like they agree with all the lockdowns even more. So I'm coming at it from a little bit of a different perspective, I suppose, is what I'm saying, because I know you guys were like, well, Hugh's opinion seemed to be that lockdowns do work, and I don't know if they do in terms of getting rid of the spread. I see anyway. Yeah, I don't know your thoughts.
My take on them is that they only slow it down. I mean, there's no cure. The virus is going to run its course. There are no vaccines, and it's after we stop the containments, after we pass the hurdle for containment, the next milestone is herd immunity, and it doesn't look like you can get herd immunity. So it's just the virus is here for keeps. So
I don't know, because I mean, some of the scientists in the UK, there's a guy who worked at Pfizer. He worked with one of those chief scientific advisors from was it Whitty or Valence, and he was at university with him. He's worked in the pharmaceutical industry. It's Mike Yearden, and he was saying he reckons a third have had it, a third are immune. So then we're only left with the other third. So his argument was, I think we're already at a kind of a herd immunity, from what I understood. He's done a really long interview. It's worth listening to. But Yeah,
I
he
think
couldn't explain it either in terms of the scientific advisors just going, "Yep, we need more lockdowns." He said, you know, they must know that we're kind of almost over it to a degree. I don't know.
Yeah, it's I don't think anybody really knows about the herd immunity story. I mean, I've said from about March that you can't believe the figures, and my gut feel is that a lot more people are infected than are shown in the figures, and I think a lot more people were asymptomatic. So yeah, but if you just look at the immunity studies, like in California, there's so many people with antibodies. It's possible that people got mild doses, and
Yeah, and the T cells.
yeah.
There was a good study. I can't remember who. It's from China, that they were saying that they didn't think the spread, the asymptomatic spread, is as pronounced as we originally thought from that study. I need to look that one up. It was on. Someone was quoting it on a radio show the other day, an alternative media source. Along with the study from Denmark about masks, which has always been a bit of a contentious one, you know, in terms of whether or not the efficacy of whether or not they help. But
Yeah, yeah. My only contention is that I think people overestimate human agency for this, and how much control we have over these things. So we've got so used to growing up with this narrative that we're in control of the environment and our destiny and the world, and this progressive narrative, that we've lost what, you know, most people up until the 1950s took for granted, that these are powerful forces and we don't really have control. I mean, nobody, you know, everybody thought of themselves as victims in 1918, in the 1918 flu epidemic. I mean, you would have been considered a nutcase in 1918 if you said, "Oh, the government should be doing more about the flu," and say, "What? They should be banning gravity?" I mean, come on, be serious. But we've become so this. The same learned helplessness that they've indoctrinated, particularly the liberal left, and everything's safety and you know, safe spaces, and you know, nobody's challenged, and non-violence, and this pacifism, and so there's this infantilization of the population, so that they think of the government as mommy and daddy.
yes.
And so they're like toddlers saying, "Mommy and daddy, you must do something." And then, you know, the guy said, "Well, you must do more testing." Like, testing does fuck all. There's no real point in testing anybody after you pass the point of containment, because you can't do tracing or contact tracing or anything like that. So you can chuck all the tests away. They're completely useless unless you're an epidemiologist and you're trying to gauge lockdowns or something. There are no cures for this, and then the idea that, oh, vaccine's going to come along is like, you're dreaming. It's like, we're still waiting for an AIDS vaccine for 40 years. So
yeah, no, I agree completely with you on the vaccine.
I wanted to add something there. I wanted to add something to what's your, sorry, I didn't get your name.
Tom, Sophie.
Tom, hi Tom, I'm Sophie.
Right.
And I wanted to get back on what you were saying about the state's problems, the reinforcement of special extreme measures of surveillance and control. I am half French, as you might hear by my accent. I live in Ireland, but I've got news there yesterday from friends in Paris, where there was 100,000 people in Bastille protesting violently against the new measures that have been taken by the government, where they want to stop people from filming or publishing films of the police exactions. And it looks like your take saying that there will be rebellions. I don't know, but in France, it looks like it could go down that way very fast.
Yeah, because French is so used to.
In Ireland, it's like we hardly have measures. Everybody started to comply with lockdown before even it was asked for, and people are doing it. We were a rural country, so it's not the same as urbanized country as the UK and France, where the majority of people are living in cities. So my experience here is completely different. But what I get from my friends over there is that there's a lot of movements getting organized, and there's an awful lot of thing going on in terms of rebellion, and more than rebellion, revolt against the
It's similar in the UK now. There's been a lot of protest. It's not nowhere near as much as France. France is always, well, I mean, look at the yellow vests, but there's been a lot of people kicking off, like down to the point, even in rural places like Cornwall, where you've got young people who are art students out, you know, in the street, and the police are coming in and they're grabbing them and arresting them and chucking them in the back of a van. You know, the police here in the UK are getting, you know, much more draconian. It's worrying.
It was there before the pandemic. It was just not the pandemic is a catalyst.
Yeah, and they've been given more powers as well.
All the things were in place. The England is one of the country of Europe that's got the most CCTVs. It's just everybody is, you know, the rules, the regulations I've seen also in the country where I lived before. I think we're just seeing a magnification, and they're just jumping on the train now. But it was there before.
Yeah, I only hope. And this was I made a point a few weeks ago after one of your videos about that, saying that I think the only hope is that maybe the people that are resisting are likely candidates to, you know, be more anarchist, or, you know, start. I mean, a lot of people are questioning what's going on now, and they're waking up, and there's people actively just saying, look, I had enough of this, you know, because everybody's losing their jobs. People can't make a living. The hospitality sector in UK is fucked, you know, it's to put it mildly. So it feels like it's and I don't want to be like, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I definitely feel like there's that top shelf where the elites have their things they want to say, okay, well, we got this virus now, so let's make use of it and have this great reset. And it's all that great reset stuff, which is, that's getting me worried, because I think, this is where they can bring in all the things they wanted to bring in for years, as you say, things, surveillance, infringement on liberties. I mean, we're not free, but it's speeding up, definitely.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're silly conspiracy theories, but that mask some obvious ones that I think people. I would like everybody to advance the dialogue and get over, particularly on the left, that conspiracy theories are QAnon and dipshits on the right on 4chan and stuff. No, dudes, there are real conspiracies. Conspiracies are not your imagination. It's become, it's a conspiracy theory, therefore it's not real. It's like, no, if you look in history, it's all conspiracies, wall to wall. It's a matter of getting the right conspiracies, and it's a sophisticated game. They not the state traditionally since Eddie Bernays is quite capable of making dipshit conspiracy theories to cover up the real ones. They've done it continually. I mean, all the thing at Roswell and stuff is a tinfoil hat conspiracy to cover up what they were really doing, which is advanced research. So I think the big conspiracy theory that people, particularly on the left, have to say, get over it. There are conspiracy theories. The conspiracy theory you're missing is the elephant in the room. It's written large over everything, and that's that there's a common narrative forming that is that they're preparing for the shit to hit the fan. They basically, you can see it in so many ways for 2 decades now. If you read all their internal analysis in the paper, all the threat assessments, they've been saying internally, and it's written in banner headlines, that there's nothing they can do about the shit coming down the road, and they basically preparing it. They're basically bunkering. They're hunkering down, preparing it for. So you have to see a bigger narrative in terms of Brexit and Trump's wall. I mean, have a look now and see what happens to Trump's wall. It'll be very interesting to see what happens to it. I think they're not, Biden's not going to step in and they start ripping up that wall. I think Biden's going to craftily keep a lot of the things that Trump has done. I don't see them sweeping in to reestablish the EPA regulations and stuff. So I think the building narrative is people are building walls. They're building walls on the internet. They're building physical barriers, and lockdown is another one in this theme of basically how do you do panic management in a world crisis. So this is an important narrative because people are joining Extinction Rebellion thinking that we're in this cozy little world where, you know, the government is asleep at the wheel and all they need is some college kids to wake them up and say, like, dude, I think the government's a little bit more clued in than you think. And so if they know all this shit and basically you can reassess the danger in the Arctic and stuff as uninformed laymen, then you can assume that the governments are really preparing. And the fact that they're not doing anything about climate change, the fact that basically they're scaling back regulations, they're going in the wrong direction, they're discovering more.
They go for a great reset.
What it's saying to you is what it's saying in banner headlines is we are fucked. If they're starting to hand out the champagne and caviar on the Titanic, it doesn't mean everything's okay. It means that we're in deep shit. And I think that's what liberals are missing. The body posture of the body politic is saying we're in crisis mode, and basically we just pacify the population, just give them shit, print money for them, but quietly bring up the barriers, quietly prepare for basically the managed extinction nightmare. They are preparing for crisis. You can see it, and the left isn't getting it. People in Extinction Rebellion are not getting it.
The only thing that people get riled up about, people can't see the mainstream media bias and no questioning and just complete. I'm shocked that people cannot see. There's no questioning of the narrative. And the thing that people get most het up about in the last week, because the government keep bringing out announcements, more defense spending, and they're going to ban petrol and diesel cars by 2030. I mean, and people, that's what they're worried about. They're not worried. They're like, vaccines on the horizon, it's all positive now. It'll be fine. And it's like, geez, but you can see even in the petrol diesel car, that's like, they want to save the fuel for themselves. It's like, we don't want people traveling around anymore. No one's going to be able to afford an electric car. I mean, even that they don't. Everyone says, "Oh, it's fine. We're going to get electric cars." Like, no, we're not going to get those. If you can afford it in a few years, I mean, great. But I keep saying to people, there's only enough, like you said, one hit to replace every car in the world with an electric car, and then that's it. We wouldn't be able to do that.
There's also enormous movements at the moment in Europe on the east side to build a complete wall also for refugees. Slowly but surely, Germany has turned its policy. Hungary has gone into total Third Reich methods. The people in Turkey are completely stuck or dumped. We don't know what's happening to them in the concentration camps. I mean, that has been going on far before the COVID, because I was following that quite closely at one stage when it's just nearly impossible to get into Europe. They've built the fortress Europe. So that's another wall going up. And that's been in preparation for about 15 years. Because the climate crisis, of course they are aware of it. Of course they know. And of course they know that there's going to be millions, if not a billion, refugees coming towards north very, very soon.
Yeah, but they're preparing for collapse. You can see walls going up everywhere. You can see the countries militarizing. Look at the headlines of all the stuff. I mean, America just dropped from an F-35. They did a test dropping a nuclear bomb at hypersonic speed. Really? And basically, they massively wrapping up this research, defense research. Everybody is. But if you look at, say, the border between Bangladesh and India, they're fortifying that. It's becoming more than like the East German Wall. Here in Greece, they're militarizing. There are more and more jets flying around. And basically, the Turkish border is being hardened against Turkey and the refugees. And so all of this is happening under everybody, the liberals, knows us, while the liberals are doing this thing about, oh, Black Lives Matter and social justice.
God.
Look, you can stick the social justice issues up your fucking ass. They're important, yes, but this is not the 1970s. There is serious shit coming down. You're like, we must have reparations for black people. What? Just before a fucking global hurricane hits? I don't think so. I think basically what the proper message that should be going out is, get over yourselves, liberals, because the shit is really going to be bad. And all these issues about gender pronouns and gender wars and stuff are just infantile compared to what you should be doing based on the crisis that's coming. And that message, I think it's absolutely unconscionable that people like, say, Rupert Reed and Jem Bendel and stuff, they should be, I mean, they know what's coming, and they should be saying very strongly, instead of saying, oh, the global south, we could learn from them and kumbaya, and start saying, guys, fuck the global south. We're in serious shit. Britain has twice as many people as it can feed. And basically, if there's a financial collapse, Britain isn't part of any global economy. There's no manufacturing going on in Britain. So instead of telling people that, yeah, we want to stop a rape culture and we want to be vegan and stuff, and say, like, no, you want to start preparing for a tidal wave that's coming down, or there's going to be real unnecessary pain. I mean, basically, instead of trying to get carbon neutral by 2025, they should basically be saying, what are we going to do with the 50% surplus population in Britain if Britain doesn't have imports anymore from, it's basically a war. Look at Britain during the war. It had half the population and it couldn't feed itself. So it's like you're twice the population now, and basically there are going to be famines in Europe, and that's an obvious thing that's coming after the Arctic collapses. So it's like, who's talking about what happens to the half of Britain's population that you can't feed? And those kind of conversations need to be had now. Not, is it racist about immigrants? Forget immigrants. Britons are the immigrants. They basically there will be refugees on the continent of Europe. And there's no guarantee that France and Spain are going to be taking British refugees.
I wonder I wanted to get your take on that, actually. Now you're talking about that. I remember reading Jim Lovelock's books, years ago. It was about 10 years ago when I first sort of thought, oh shit, we're in trouble here in terms of global warming, climate change. I read that book. I think it was The Revenge of Gaia, and that was that kind of blew me away. But he changed his mind a lot in recent years. I believe he kind of thinks that we can transition to some kind of, hothouse Earth. But he always maintained that he thought the UK could be like a lifeboat in a hotter world. But I don't know, I was always a bit skeptical of that. I think his argument was, we'll figure out how to synthesize food, which sounds pretty terrible. But I wanted to get your take on that.
So I think that the narrative of a warming Earth is very wrong. One of the bad things in the narrative about climate change is that it's smooth. We shouldn't be talking in terms of global warming. We should be talking in terms of climate destabilization. So so what Britain's problem is the climate is unpredictable. So you can't. It doesn't matter if you have a hothouse Earth. You'll only be able to grow things under glass, and then something happens like basically the Arctic's being Atlantified, and the Atlantic conveyor is slowing. So if the Gulf Stream current, which is slowing dramatically, if that ever slows to a halt, and nobody really understands the dynamics of it, 1 year it could just grind to a halt. Well, then Britain's problem is freezing. So in the midst of a warming world, basically, there would be an ice age in Britain. So it's hard to predict all these things. But what you can predict with confidence is it's not whatever crops you're growing in the year 2000, you're not growing those in the year 2030. And if you think you still have the same agricultural production with the same crops in 2050, you really are dreaming. So it's basically saying if there's massive uncertainty, so the aim is to make Britain more resilient. Well, the very first thing to make Britain more resilient is to stop all the imports, to stop all this asparagus coming in from Chile and on planes and stuff. It's like one thing that this pandemic is very good preparation. I mean, people are not maximizing the lessons they could learn from it, but one of the good things is people now realize that global problems do happen. It's not like the globe's too big for any shit to befall it. And so a big chunk of denial fell off people. And I felt it visibly as a Cassandra that now everybody finally realized that shit does happen. It was a huge relief to me. I feel so much lighter since the pandemic. But the thing is that they should be taking lessons from the pandemic, like the transport infrastructure cannot carry on like it is. So everybody's trying to get back to it, even increase it. Biden and stuff, they're going to try and spend a lot on infrastructure and say it's crazy. I mean, the lesson from the pandemic is the food distribution system has to become more local. It's just written in banner headlines on it. Basically, what the pandemic shows is that the system's too fragile, and instead we're doubling down on that fragility. Biden's about to embark on a $2 trillion spend to increase this frail situation that we have. Basically to double down on it, and so we should be heading.
We're doing HS2.
Okay.
And we're doing HS2, you know, the high-speed rail.
Yeah.
What, I mean, why? What, it's just
well, it's a job creation program.
Yeah, it's vanity, like, you know, jobs to the boys. It's all, you know, politicians.
It's got nothing to do with infrastructure. HS2 is just got to do with politics and money, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, who needs that link anyway? No. What we can expect now is far less tourism. I don't think. I mean, for starters, the tourist industry has been decimated. So here's one of the things that one of the many lessons people are not getting from the pandemic, and that's the pandemic is running a deficit, right? We're running up a bill during these lockdowns. Everybody thinks, well, you slow down the economy. No. They're doing massive. It's historically high deficit spending. So there's never been deficit spending around the world anywhere close to what's been done in the last year. That doesn't come for free. Immediately after lockdown comes austerity. So the austerity might be worse than the lockdown. Now, nobody's prepared for that. Everybody thinks, we get a vaccine and we go back to laughing. And it's like, no. Then austerity and pay down for this year comes. And so every moment of lockdown, everybody thinks is almost for free. But every week has to be paid back with like 10 weeks of austerity.
I actually, on that point, I think that this is the other thing I was going to say. I think that could, if we get, like, I don't know who knows how it will play out. I mean, some people are saying, you know, the usual Goldbergs and those contrarians are saying we get massive deflation and then into hyperinflation. And when the populace, because everyone's going to lose their jobs. I mean, it's a depression. It's going to be a disaster. In the UK, particularly, I mean, everywhere it's going to be terrible. But I mean, yeah, it's going to be a nightmare. So I think that a lot more people maybe will come out and say, well, fuck the government. Look, they've done us over. But then the problem is that they're saying now, well, the central banks are going to come in with a digital currency and people are just going to be like, well, I need money, you know, and they're just going to, you know, again, it's going to be more restrictions. They're going to be like, you're only going to be able to spend that money in a certain way. You'll only be able to go here if you have a passport and you've got the vaccine and it's a digital passport. I don't know. It's all digital, all more control. But yeah, maybe people will finally start waking up when they've lost their job, they've lost their house and we've got hyperinflation, but maybe we won't get inflation.
In Bristol, in the UK, they've started years ago a local currency, and different communities in England.
I know that, yeah.
And again, we go back to what Hugh was saying. Localization is the only solution for predicament, only for resilience. It's only for survival. And local currencies are easy to start. They work. You've heard of the Bristol pound. You probably read about it.
Yeah, I do know about that. Yeah.
It's really good. It's really good. You know? Yeah, but we don't have no choice anyway. It's going to be that or bartering, or any type of exchange. I think you have to get off the official currencies as quick as you can in your community, in your life.
Yeah, I mean, as a way of just navigating this kind of time, I think the way to see it is it's a wartime economy. So essentially, this is 1939, and you can see what it'll be like to live in Britain in like 2021 is far more like Britain in 1945 than it is in Britain in 2018 or something. It's you can see that there might be rationing, there might be not so much rationing with food stamps and things like that, which is too evocative of that time. But there's sophisticated equivalents of that, and cryptocurrencies are a kind of a token system for rationing. But in terms of, you could see things that everybody thinks are social progress, like UBI, that is really just secret rationing.
Yeah.
So there's also things like debt forgiveness and jubilees, that those will come too, but those are all part of a managed economy.
Yeah.
So it's basically they're managing since January, before the pandemic. We've been in a command economy where everything is really being done by fiat. It's not being done. There's no free market economics. Those stopped in 2008. So the way to see it is, if you want to know what it's going to be like in 2021, you should start thinking in terms of Britain during the war, and what you're allowed to do, what you're allowed to say. The kind of regimes is probably more like that than say getting back to business as usual.
But I think it will be much worse because as I say, because there's been so many things they've just brought in through the back door, and all these new policies. I just don't think people are awake to it yet. I hope that people will just start waking up and be like, no, fuck this, But
there's structural changes. I mean, the biggest thing in America is that we're going to lose, dollar hegemony. So since 1945, America has been surviving on the fact that it's the world's reserve currency, and now China has another one. There's equivalents of the SDR, but there's the balance of payment systems and the trade deficits that countries have run up against each other are unsustainable. So what, for example, they're hidden now by the pandemic, but they're going to come out starkly. So, for example, like in Greece, they really have a kind of tourist economy and then restaurants. So this season was not good at all, basically probably about half the revenue that they should have got. Now Greece is in a bit of trouble. They're just kind of running on deficit. But now look at how they're running up deficits, and now compare that to Germany. Germany hardly got a dent. And as soon as Germany can balance the books and feels that it's fiscally stable, it's going to say, like, back to business as usual. In which case, they're spreading debt all to countries like Greece. So Greece is right underwater in terms of just drowning in debt. They've accumulated a lot more debt to survive the lockdowns and the pandemic. And then Germany comes storming back, full-on manufacturing, basically, and loaning money. So what that's going to do is make a massive discrepancy between balance of payments of the countries that were hit hardest. And it's not evident now because we're in lockdown, but there must be huge deficits that are asymmetric around the world. And so some of these countries are going to be going like dominoes, and some of them will be really prosperous. So you will get countries like China that are going to try and manufacture their way out, countries like Greece that are going to try and borrow their way out, places like Germany, places like Russia are going to try and mine minerals and basically pour energy and oil out, and Saudi Arabia has the same strategy. So there are these massive basic disequilibriums that are coming. And with those kind of balance of payments deficits, then you'll see things like wars and things like that. So there's massive political instability from those.
Did you see? I'm interested. Did you see the announcement by the IMF they're going to basically they were announcing that they're calling for a Bretton Woods renegotiation of the monetary system. It was a few weeks ago. So that was, and they openly said in that, yeah, the pandemic has caused all of this, job losses, and we're going to have massive spending, and we're going to have, and they're basically calling for a digital currency. Few people saying that when the next banking crisis hits, the central banks will sacrifice the retail banking sector, and you'll end up with the people will have they'll sell it to the people that it's all okay, all your fiat balance that was there, that will be transferred into a digital currency at the central bank. Everybody will have an account at the central bank, and people will think this is, well, they won't have any choice. And of course that's how they'll manage it.
The World
That's different from the
Economic
trade
Forum. The World Economic Forum calls it the Great Reset.
Yeah,
they have to do it. They've been in a position where they have to do it since 2008. So they've been fending it off.
yeah.
But the reason why they haven't gone for an SDR, basically they're doing Keynes's Bancor after. So yeah. Keynes suggested during Bretton Woods that you have to have a neutral global reserve currency, so everybody can basically run a deficit against a fictitious country rather than run a deficit against a real country. And America said, nah, we got a better idea. We have the dollar, and everybody runs a deficit against America. And so then basically that's done tremendous good for the standard of living in America, but it's been a disaster for the rest of the world. And so now they could never get off that, because America would never allow the SDR, which is special drawing rights, which is the UN's version of the Bancor. And then China now has come and said, well, we've got our own currency. We'll make the renminbi, and basically we'll back it by gold and make it exchangeable for oil, and that's the end of dollar hegemony. So there are a number of initiatives, and then Russia's got one for cryptocurrency to say, but everybody, it's not like there will be one global reserve currency now. There's going to be a competition for the global reserve currency. Yeah. And then so it's going to be the opposite of what Keynes was trying to achieve in Bretton Woods. So these bankers are talking about the Great Reset. So this is all of the that's their big thing. But the Great Reset is a horrible thing. It basically there has to be a reset, but the public doesn't even understand what this conversation is about. So they kind of will force it on us, but it really is the one world order. But I think it's possible to achieve, because the world is fragmenting so badly, between Asia and the West and South America, and basically everybody's heading in separate directions. So there has to be a grand reset, but it's not going to be a controlled reset like they want. It's going to be disintegration. So yeah, cryptocurrencies around the world, I think everybody's going to have one, so it's not going to work very well.
Yeah. Jim Rickard said he's an American, analyst guy, and he was talking about, he said something really interesting, actually. He was like, there's not conspiracy, and there's not dark, a big table with all guys in hoods, like coming up with conspiracy theories, but he said that, the elites have their top shelf stuff, and then when there's a crisis, they say, we'll implement that, and get that done. And that's what's happening now. And he mentioned about in relation to the dollar hegemony with China, he reckoned that there'd be no need to go to war with China, because China has all these treasuries. So the US could just delete all their dollar treasuries that they hold, or something. I don't know, something along those lines. And then, China would be, they wouldn't have that dollar ratchet on the US, as it were. That's what he was getting at, something along those
Yeah,
lines.
so yeah, China
Mm-hmm.
owns the debt. So
Yes. Yeah.
America could default on its T-bills,
Yeah.
and that would leave China in the cold. But
Yeah.
that kind of drastic thing is a declaration of war. So
Okay.
you know, basically, it would mean, well, if you think about it, if they unilaterally announced, say that we're not going to honor T-bills of like a 30-year note or something like that, the first thing would happen was basically oil would stop flowing, because basically everything is bought long on oil, and basically commodities exchanges survive on bonds. So it would be bond apocalypse. And so, yeah, it's basically saying we can't pay the bonds. We're just going to set the house on fire. And so I don't think they can do that, because the bond apocalypse is disaster for everybody.
Yeah, he was implying that it was like they had that Alp on China. You know, it's like that's something they could manipulate China with.
No, it's quite a wrong reading. We're more in the situation of World War One. In fact, it resembles very much, you know, basically a mixture of you know, the 1930s and the alliances before World War One. So it's the trade alliances are very much like the network of alliances that forced everybody into World War One. So the same thing. The political treaties in World War One that were designed to stabilize everybody and prevent war sent them all to war. We've got the same kind of thing with all the treaties from NAFTA and all these kind of trade agreements, the WTO and stuff. They're all cunningly designed so that the same thing now exists in the financial realm. So we will drag everybody into a financial war, which might lead to a real war, because we have the same kind of treaties, financial treaties. So yeah, basically think about it. If somebody put, you know, Trump almost did it with the tariffs and that. It's kind of like a march in the Sudetenland. But everything is coupled in a way that there has to be a financial disaster. There's no way that this works nicely. Just like you can see people, just like they marched into World War One. You can see everybody marching into the financial version of the politics that led to World War One. Well, that's my take on it. Yeah, you can see all the blocks and stuff.
Yeah, it's incredibly ironic. I mean, again, I'm not being conspiratorial here, but when you think how last September the interbank lending rates, the repo market rates, they shot up, didn't they, to 10% or whatever it was, and then, you know, and they were papering over the cracks before last Christmas, and then suddenly come, you know, December, January, we got this virus come along. It's just like, you know, incredibly amazing how the timing of these things. I mean, well, there is evidence to suggest it was in a lab. Not saying that it was that it was deliberately released, but that the virus was being, you know, that it came from a lab. Because I think the Centers for Disease Control was near that wet market in Wuhan, wasn't it? There was a few labs there, and the Americans were there checking it all out and saying how they didn't like how it was being run and stuff. There was collaboration between the American health, disease control.
You know, I've also wondered why nobody's come out with that conspiracy theory, because it's such an obvious one. That basically the financial system collapsed in January, and the public didn't notice. So basically, there was a global. Basically, we would be in this situation without a pandemic, and no one realizes that. So the pandemic comes along, and then is a great excuse for why there's a financial collapse. And the timing is so exquisite that you say, like, man, the guys either got incredibly lucky or otherwise they engineered it. And I'm surprised that nobody came up with a conspiracy theory saying this whole pandemic is just to cover up the fact that the financial systems collapsed.
Yeah.
And so, but it's, I mean, whether it's a conspiracy or not, it doesn't matter. The effect is the same, is that the financial system collapsed, and then came the pandemic. So we've had a year where it's been hidden by lockdown and stuff. So nobody really knows where things stand. But it's much the same as the climate, because there's instability. You see, the thing is, if you look at all the indicators, if you look at the VIX and the Baltic Dry Index and stuff, is the instruments are just spinning. Basically, you cannot make a coherent picture out of what's going on. You can't even begin to. So like the Baltic Dry Index, which should say that, you know, it should be through the floor at the moment because nobody's shipping anything. But the Baltic Dry Index is going through the roof. And the reason is because they furloughed a whole lot of ships. A lot of the ships were in quarantine, stuck somewhere. So now if you want to, you know, ship some dry goods, it costs you an arm and a leg because you can't find anybody to deliver it.
Right. Yeah.
And all these things are all kind of discombobulated in this way. If you know, borrowing money is effectively negative. It's all the instruments on the panel are just going nuts. So you have to just ignore the entire panel and say, you know, just fly by the seat of your pants. And fly by your seat of pants is we're in turbulence, severe turbulence. So so I mean, the only point of saying all this is to warn people that it's not coming back the way they think it is. We're not, you know, Joe Biden comes in and, we've got a good pilot at the helm now. Basically, Joe Biden's seat is going to put his ass on the pilot's seat and be overwhelmed instantly. He's going to be fucked from day one. He's going to be wishing he never took that job. But you know, there are all these guys. He's doing a good job of like assembling the cabinet and being a responsible president, getting back to how presidents should be. But he's an old man and he's got his head stuck in the 1960s. So he thinks he's going to take control of this machine, and is like saying, you know, the first thing he's going to say, "What's our fuel position?" And the people will say, like, "Fuck knows, well, this instrument says it's full, this instrument says it's empty, this says it's on fire." And pretty soon he's going to be like, "Somebody got to tell me what's going on here," and say, "We don't know, arsehole." That's why, you know. But so, you know, that's where we headed with Biden. But everybody thinks we're like, now we got a steady hand on the helm, and
but
now we're going to.
he hasn't got enough.
No, he's not.
There's not enough people in this. He hasn't got enough people in the Senate anyway. The numbers, he can't get anything. He won't be able to put anything through, will he? Or it'll just be hard work, won't it, in the House of
Representatives? We're in deadlock. Yeah, we're deadlock. It's Goldilocks said the reason why the stock market took off to 30,000 is because the legislative body is paralyzed. So basically, where the election came out was to paralyze the legislative body. So now nobody can do anything. They're in deadlock. So then basically they say, "Hooray, off to the races." Amazon's not going to be basically declared a monopoly and broken up. And it's a free lunch for all these guys. So they went to a party, and that's why they went through 30,000. It's funny as hell. But also the reason why it went through 30,000 is because money's meaningless. I mean, it's like the primary instrument on the value of money is like nobody knows what $1 is worth now. It's just, you know, but there's you could just say any price. There's no forward value. there's no price discovery. It's just absolutely.
Made me laugh last week at the UK. You know, the Chancellor announced another like spending review, and it was like, I don't know, like how much we borrowed, and you saw the graph, and it was like this year, just like Jesus Christ. And they were like, but it's okay because, you know, interest rates are low, so it's never been cheaper to borrow money. But it's just like in the long term, like clearly it's just going to be, people are going to, money's just not going to be worth anything. And
yeah, the thing is, how do you actually bring interest rates up again?
Yeah,
so just imagine if something happens like Brexit doesn't go too well in December, and then basically the value of the pound. What could be very likely is people bring all this money onshore. Yeah. That basically, because Britain becomes a deregulated tax haven Bahamas, then all this money could flood in, and basically the pound could shoot up. Yeah. Then they have to apply interest rates at a time when it would just cripple everybody. Yeah. So they stuck. They would have to see the pound inflate at the very time when they can't do anything about it. Yeah. So they're in trouble. Yeah. They're definitely in trouble.
Definitely. Yeah.
Well, this took an interesting turn. We turned into finance. But anyway,
Sorry.
while we're on the subject of finance,
But in the meantime, sorry, go ahead.
while we're on the subject of finance, this is something that I'm not sorry at all that it took this turn, because the left doesn't do finance or understand the economy, and so it's very unfortunate, because that's the only language these psychopaths speak. And so, in terms of activism and change that XR is trying to do, it has to be done in terms of finance. If you do a blockade of something, there's only one way that they measure that blockade, and how much does it cost. And if you look at the cost benefit, if you look at, say, what happened in April in XR, they paid £1 million. And what did it go on? It went on like vegetarian meals for the demonstrators for 10 days. And it's like, okay, that cost you £1 million. How much did it cost the government? Well, the government has the resources of maybe 10 trillion, and it probably cost them $1 million in policing, and the police probably loved it because they got overtime. So,
Yeah.
You have to see in terms of what the government can afford. It was probably a penny, and what XR can afford was probably £100, and in equivalent for what their budget is. So basically, XR broke their financial bank to make a symbolic statement, and the financial impact to the UK government was virtually zero. So you have to start thinking in terms of bang for the buck. So they have to start thinking in terms of what can you do that costs pennies for the movement, but it costs big dollars. And so the asymmetry between that, the cost-benefit analysis of every single action, should be seen in dollar terms. You should be saying, how much does this cost us? And us means activists. It means basically money they've raised from donations. It means basically every resource, the time of the people and the personal time of all the activists. So the activists that go then get chucked in jail, get arrested, then they will pay big fines. That has to be factored in, because that's part of the resources of the movement. Yeah. So up till now, XR has been absolutely disastrous, because they've bankrupted themselves to cost the government nothing.
This is exactly it, isn't it? And to your point about big organizations of rebellion and protest, it's clearly not working. As you said, you need lone wolf attacks. But it's so funny. It's just embarrassing watching Gail Bradbrook on the mainstream news trying to defend a money rebellion and telling people to default on their mortgages, and you can just see, like, and the interview is just like, what are you talking about? People, and it just doesn't come across in the right way. I don't know. I despair with Gail, and yeah.
Well, I think what they should be doing is, if you assume what they're doing with lockdowns is basically prepping us, they're setting a precedent, basically conditioning people to be used to lockdowns, because they're going to use them as a technique for sure. That they're establishing how much they can get away with. They're testing their muscle. I think that's pretty easy to read without being too conspiratorial. Is they really are testing what you can do in a crisis. They're testing the limits of what the public will stand for. Yeah. And so the same is true for XR and the movement. They should be doing the same kind of thing. And so what I think they should do is a token rebellion. So they should just hold a nickel and a dime or something like that. So you should withhold that from rent and rent payments, and set up the mechanism. So you set up the culture of financial resistance. It's too much to try and make a frontal assault on the financial industry. There are trillions and trillions of dollars that pass through London every day. A lot of them on the Forex and stuff. You're not going to make a dent in that. No. But what you can do is get people used to the idea that their financial muscle collectively is everything. The protest muscle is zero. Nobody has a voice.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I almost feel like it'd be more powerful if XR just had like a final statement and just said, look, it's never going to happen, but you know, this is not the strategy, and we all quit and everyone goes underground and everyone splits into tiny cells. And that would almost be more powerful if suddenly XR has disbanded and, you know, and but they haven't, but they've all just split into lone wolves and tiny, and the people that are really serious.
They won't do that. I mean,
but it'll never happen. But
if they were really sophisticated, they would have taken their chance with when they said they were going to make them a terrorist organization. They should have called the government's bluff and said, "Oh, you want us to be a terrorist? Okay, we're a terrorist organization. You asked for it, we're it." And basically gone underground instantly, and then basically they would have had a coup because the government would have said, like, you turned us into it. We were peaceful up until the day you said we were terrorists. You want us to be terrorists? We're terrorists. And then the government would have been fucked. They would have lost a political coup. But of course, the movement's too weak. So they said, no, we're not terrorists. And so, like, you were just handed a plum. You know, it's basically, it's whether you're a terrorist or not is just a word. It's not like some switch flips over and the government is now capable of doing anything against the movement. It's like there's still the rule of law. It doesn't mean you fall into a new, although they try to make it that way. And they say, oh, then XR is an extremist and then you can do all sorts of different things to them. It's like, it's not really like that. You're still a private citizen and they still have to prove you're a member of the organization. And it's way more complicated than you're a terrorist, then, you know, different kind of rule applies.
And it's so, sorry.
No, you were saying about, I just want to come back on something you said, Hugh, there that put me thinking there. You said they're going to try to get us used to lockdown. And I think that can be used as a very powerful tool for local action and underground action, actually turning lockdown into an advantage for rebellion, you know, because you say it's going to be important. I think it's very fertile ground.
Lockdown is to the advantage of the revolution. So lockdown is seriously counterproductive for the government. You see, again, think of it in terms of cost benefit. What the rebellion should be doing is promoting lockdown, because it's an overreach by the government. So you don't want to basically be identified as pro-lockdown, but you should be doing everything you can to entice them, because it's a mistake for the government. The government gets a phenomenal financial hit, just in terms. Okay, going back to looking at it.
I don't think they need any encouragement in this country. They don't.
Yeah, they do, just in terms of oil revenue, the tax on oil revenue.
Oh, well, yeah.
So, yeah, the government the inland revenue will be feeling a lack of...
yeah, of course. But I mean, the people, a lot of people are calling for it, and the politicians are still like, oh, you know, it's really painful, but, you know, we've got to do more. We've got to double down. So I don't know if they...
the movement should capitalize on it. But what the movement should do is say, you know, is overdo the mommy and daddy thing, in my view. So they should say that, you know, basically criticize the government, saying, you can't protect us in this thing, and basically, you know, saying you should be doing more lockdowns, you should be stricter, and then basically force the government into that, because then if you know, the government would be overreaching, and they know it. They don't really want to do lockdown.
Well, we may get that, because you know, if at the ballot box, if Labour get in the next election, or I don't know, that's a while away yet, but they were calling for much tougher restrictions. They would have followed the scientists to the letter, and we'd be, you know, we would have been locked down since the end of summer if they'd have had their way. There's no resistance to the...
If you look at the graphs of cases and deaths in relation to the lockdown since March, you can see that all these kind of decrees and waves and all this is totally artificially created by the lockdowns. As soon as you see it yourself, in June it went down, and then the people went on holidays, and then in September it went up. So the authorities are trying to indoctrinate people to say, oh, you see, we did great. Look, the cases didn't do great. It just went into lockdown, and that's what lockdown does. That's what's a healthy lifestyle does. You're not so many people traveling, not so many people interacting, but it's going to come back again and again. And that should be emphasized by revolutionary movements, rebellious movements, that this is an artificial control of the pandemic, saying, well, oh, it's a second wave, which is not a second wave. It's still the first wave. We can see it on the world
Yeah,
cases.
it don't go in waves. This idea that pandemics go in waves has been debunked by a lot of scientists, but the mainstream media love it. It's like, oh yeah, another wave. It's like, no, it doesn't go in a wave. It's not. It doesn't go like that.
Yeah, but in terms of strategy, the left needs to be made more extreme. That's the whole thing about Extinction Rebellion and what Roger Hallam's trying to do. And Gail is really the first step is to make the left more extreme. And so this is a gift to make. Basically, the people will come out more extreme. So what the movement should be doing is try and aggravate the government, to try and stop, make them overreach. So traditionally, at this stage of all revolutions, all the way from Baader Meinhof and in South Africa and stuff, is that they did acts that would make the government lock down. The more security, the more upfront the government is, the more in your face, the more unreasonable the government seems, the more people get extreme. They basically, it's the more extreme people, the more you have revolutionaries to recruit from. So what XR should be doing now is doing, say, campaigns for resistance against lockdown and stuff. So then the movement takes a slight hit because the establishment says you're irresponsible. But it